Today, we are unlocking one of the absolute most powerful features for protecting your data in the cloud, S3 replication. I mean, what if you could create an automatic, live, digital twin for your most critical data? That's exactly what we're going to dig into. It's a true game changer for data resilience.
So let's just start with this one really important question. Is your company's most critical data, the stuff you absolutely cannot lose, living in just one single place? Because if the answer is yes, then you're basically staring down a single point of failure. One outage, one accident, and it could all be at risk. That is the exact problem we're here to solve today.
All right, here's the game plan. First, we'll cover what S3 replication actually is. Then we'll get into its two main flavors, CRR and SRR. After that, we'll go over the non-negotiable rules you gotta know, then a quick setup guide, and finally, we'll wrap it all up into your very own data protection playbook. So let's dive in.
Okay, kicking things off with Section 1, what is this thing? I love to think of S3 replication as a set-and-forget insurance policy for your data. Seriously, you configure it one time, and it just works tirelessly in the background, keeping you protected.
So what is it really? Well, at its core, S3 replication is just this automatic, asynchronous, and continuous process. It copies your S3 objects and all their metadata from what we call a source bucket to a destination bucket. And you really want to focus on those two words, automatic and continuous. It means once you set a rule, any new object you upload gets copied over, no questions asked, no manual work needed from you. So why would you even bother with this? Well, the reasons are pretty compelling. For starters, it is the absolute backbone of so many disaster recovery plans. It also lets you distribute your data all over the globe, which cuts down on lag for your users. It helps you meet those super strict compliance and audit rules that say you need offsite copies. And it can even power some really complex multi-region applications. It's just incredibly versatile.
Now, replication isn't some one-size-fits-all solution. It actually comes in two distinct flavors, and picking the right one is a really key strategic decision. So let's break down the two main options you've got: cross-region versus same-region replication.
First up, we have cross-region replication, or CRR for short. And just like the name says, this copies your data to a bucket in a completely different AWS region. So we're talking about taking your data from, say, a server in Virginia and shooting it all the way over to a bucket in California, or maybe even to London. This is all about geographic redundancy. It protects you if an entire region has a massive failure.
And on the other hand, you've got same-region replication, or SRR. This copies your data to another bucket too, but it stays within the very same AWS region. Now you might be thinking, wait, why would I do that? Well, this is perfect when you need to separate your data for logical reasons. Like maybe you want to pull all your log files together into one central bucket. Or you want to keep your production and development data copies separate, but still geographically close.
Okay, so let's just put these two side by side. It really boils down to this. On the left, you've got CRR. Think geographic protection. This is for your big disaster recovery plans and for serving global users. Then on the right, you have SRR for logical separation. That's for things like centralizing logs or keeping your dev and prod environments isolated, all within one region.
Okay, hold on. Before you rush off to set this up, there are some absolutely non-negotiable rules. You have to know these. Seriously, getting these wrong is the #1 reason people run into problems, so let's make sure you get these fundamentals right from the jump.
And here it is, the single most important rule of all. If you remember literally nothing else from this explainer, please remember this. S3 versioning must be enabled on both the source and the destination buckets. Without it, replication just plain will not work. Period. End of story. This is what lets S3 keep track of every version of an object, and that is essential for this whole process to work.
And there are a few other key behaviors you need to know about. So, by default, replication only works on new objects you upload after you set up the rule. You also need a specific security role, an IAM role, to give S3 permission to actually copy your stuff. Also, it's a one-way street. It only goes from source to destination. And you get to choose whether deleting an object in the source also deletes it in the destination. And finally, it's eventually consistent, which sounds technical, but it just means your copies show up super fast, usually within seconds or minutes.
All right, that's enough theory. Let's get practical and turn this into action. So how do you actually go about setting this up? We're not going to go through every single click here, but the high-level process is actually very straightforward.
It really just boils down to these 5 steps.
First, you create your source and destination buckets. Easy enough. Second, and you already know what I'm going to say, right? You enable versioning on both of them. Third, you create that special IAM role that gives S3 all the permissions it needs. Fourth, you define your rules, like are you replicating the entire bucket or just files that start with a certain name. And finally, step 5, you test it. Upload a file and watch the magic as it appears in your destination bucket.
So let's bring this all home. We've covered a lot of ground, and now we can boil it all down into a simple but really effective playbook for your own data protection strategy.
Here it is, your playbook summary. Use cross-region replication when you need that critical off-site disaster recovery. Use same region replication for that logical separation, like for your log files. The #1 rule always is to enable versioning first. Be super careful when you configure your permissions, and finally, you have to make a conscious choice about whether or not you want deletions to replicate over.
And you know, this quote just perfectly captures the end goal here. When you set this up the right way, it's not just some random feature. It becomes a reliable framework for your entire data strategy. It's the foundation for protection, for being resilient during an audit, and for intelligent data distribution.
So we'll leave you with this thought. You now have the playbook to give your most important data its own digital twin. The only question left is, what are you going to do about it? What is your data's continuity plan? Thanks for joining this explainer.